Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. And it's a very diverse group, so I'll try to appeal to everybody. No, thanks. If this had been a project on volcanoes, we would have been in very good shape. But fortunately, with the eruption in Iceland, we got the chance to measure a lot of data. And we have been, the data has been mentioned several times, many times this morning. And that's the only thing I'm going to talk about. Because really, without the data, we are flying blind. And so this is the basis of the project. Since I started, I'll get it off my chest. I was going to talk about it at a different point. But it's quite actually interesting in my mind that when we're thinking so much about data, and I've always been thinking about data and then what to do with the data. It's quite difficult to make data. And even in this day and age of seemingly endless data, there isn't really a lot of ground motion data or structural response data. The networks have been expanding for sure, but we have an unbelievable large number of data really that is coming from smartphones. And there are two partners in this project that have made very good use of that, and that is implemented. But what I'll be talking about is the more, let's say, conventional approach. And I will focus on that, and about the felt reports and the smartphone data, that's another thing, which I think is a very important and very interesting aspect of this project. But when we talk about the turnkey testbeds, which is the title of my presentation, then what we're really talking about is essentially the lack of data. Why did we need testbeds? And I'll get into that, but I would like to acknowledge that the testbeds that are listed as 2 and 8, the 8 testbeds, and these are the testbed leads in different countries, in different institutions, and they are essentially the core of the project in terms of producing data, and then we have supporting partners that have been. It's been really a very good collaborative project, and in this work package, which is number 2. But so basically, the overall objective, as has been said, and this is the mantra that has been repeated here, is that the overall objective is basically to contribute to the earthquake risk reduction and mitigate the direct and indirect consequences of earthquakes in Europe. And then we are using for that, want to capture this using the platform that we are here to talk about. But because of the essentially lack of data and the wide variety of earthquake conditions and man-made environment conditions and different stakeholders that are worried about their properties and their operations of the businesses, and the fact that we don't have instruments everywhere, every square kilometer, then we needed really to think to ourselves, how should we then ensure that we get enough data, versatile data, that we can actually do something with and demonstrate this approach, this overall approach. And to do that, we needed to combine essentially various seismic regions in Europe. This heat map shows the seismic hazard, and the circles are showing essentially where the testbeds are located. So they're covering together. We feel that we are covering an immense variety of both types of networks, the spatial extents, how big let's say the areas are. I mean the port of Gio Tauro here, and the Pyrenees are of vastly different spatial extent, so there's completely different concerns that people have in those testbeds. So this is basically what we're trying to capture, and hopefully by delivering data from all these areas, we are hopefully testing more things, let's say, that are pertinent to stakeholders. But the basis of the turnkey project, essentially, and the procedure in the testbeds is this: the consistent approach to the instrumentation using the turnkey multi-sensor unit that has been mentioned to record data that is managed and analyzed by the SISCOM system, but it's enabled by real-time streaming of data, and that's where the telecommunications companies come in. And then, as has been mentioned, the SISCOM system delivers parametric data to the turnkey platform in near real time. Now, as has been mentioned, the turnkey testbeds in this map, there are 6 that are geographically confined. Then there is the worldwide testbed based on the instrumentation through smartphones and responses from users, crowdsources, that is basically providing, we call it testbed 7, because it could very well have been during this project that we would not have gotten any real significant earthquakes in these testbeds, and then we would only have been testing the platform or this approach using small event data. But with this, we were ensuring that we could get at least some data in. And then in this project, a mobile aftershock testbed has been developed by Pierre in testbed 2. And to my knowledge, it has not yet found deployment yet, just based on the situation. This has been mentioned also, the pandemic and other things. But these testbeds are city of Bucharest, this is testbed 1, then the region of the Pyrenees in France, then 2 transform zones in Iceland, a different, very active zone is the normal faulting zone in the Corinth, which is Patras and Io. And then a very important transportation hub, port of Giotauro, and then the Groningen geothermal fields. So it's quite versatile. And I'll mention that in this, So if I go over it, basically in this project, there were 132 instruments, these turnkey Raspberry Shakes, that were deployed, and another 26 GPS instruments. I wasn't really prepared for this. I'm kind of have to get a bifocal so it works. No, this is definitely not in focus. So it's not operator. I've never met a conference venue that didn't have any hiccups like that. So if this can be at all adjusted, then yeah, seriously. So, okay, then I'll just have to make sure I read it. Okay, so Bernd talked a little bit about the instruments. I'll come back to those later. But in each testbed, the deployments are different, and they serve different purposes. Can you hear me like that? And I will mention that as well. But the important thing is that why we call this a multi-sensor instrument is because we are combining the GPS with the Raspberry Shake, and the Raspberry Shake essentially operates as a hub for any kind of data. You can plug in different instruments into the Raspberry Shake, and it will then be used, then it will then be transmitted through what has been mentioned as the common acquisition protocol system that has been developed in this project. Now, this is an overview of the installation in Bucharest. This is the installation in the Pyrenees, in Iceland, in Greece, in the Port Giotaro, and then in the Groningen field. And included in these stations layouts are not only the turnkey instruments, but also existing sensors from existing networks. Because the turnkey, the Raspberry Shakes, they're optimized as, let's say, they work really well as densification, as a filler for existing networks, but they're very portable due to their new technology. Now, these are some examples that have been shown also before about the installations inside a building, outside, along with a GPS. This is the GPS control unit. This is the Raspberry Shake in a protective box. Here is an existing GPS, continuous GPS, and the turnkey unit is in this box here. And then a structural monitoring setup where this unit is in Bucharest is actually on the ceiling in a box, monitoring structural response. So I'll go a little bit into detail about each one. So when we're talking about Bucharest, then the purpose in Bucharest was the operational earthquake forecasting, that's one, the earthquake early warning, and the rapid response to earthquake impacts. These are the three acronyms that you heard. But Bucharest was selected because it's considered one of the most earthquake endangered metropolises in Europe. And all of the damaging earthquakes that happen, about 150 kilometers northeast of the city. And this is a modern city with all kinds of the infrastructure of a modern society, but it has a huge population, and one of the infrastructures that is unknown there is essentially the apartment buildings that have been built throughout the decades at different periods of different structural design codes. And basically properties of these apartment buildings in the response to earthquakes needs to be mapped. And that is what the installation focused on, ground units and then structural response units in representative apartment buildings and tall buildings in the city. Now, here you see the number of stations. I'll go to the next one. The Pyrenees. This is one of the most seismically active regions in France, and there are two focus areas that have been chosen. It's impossible for me to remember this, so I have to just get the key points here. Now, there's the high-speed train line between Figueres in Spain and Perpignan in France, which is a major axis of travel between Barcelona and Paris, which is here. And it's a part of what is called the Trans-European Transport Network and the Mediterranean Core Network Corridor. So there have been a number of multi-sensor units that have been deployed next to the tracks in order to assess the dynamic response in case of an earthquake and in critical structures there. Now, and for that reason, the focus of the testbed 2 in France is basically on rapid response action to earthquakes, which is different from what it is in Bucharest, for example, even though that also includes that. Then testbed 3, which is Iceland. Basically, these regions here are highly seismic, very high seismically active, and they are these are two big transform zones in the country, and so it basically we have all elements of a modern infrastructure that is susceptible to earthquakes. We are focusing what we call this testbed, the names of two towns. Hveragerði is here in the south, and it's the location of a dense array of instruments that wasn't there before. Now, and then in the north, Húsavík is a town here, and there is also another array of instruments, dense array of existing stations. Now, and the purpose in this project, what we were going for there was primarily station installations that contribute to earthquake early warning, operational earthquake forecasting, and then in a sense, then the third thing follows, rapid response to earthquakes. But what is shown here are multiple instruments of existing sensor networks. And you might think that, well, since there are so many stations, why do you really need more? Well, the thing is, in real time, the whole seismic wave field is not monitored. The National Seismic Network, it clips at the large motions, and therefore we need, in many cases, to have the raspberry shakes there co-located with the other stations so that we ensure that we capture the entire wave field and therefore can communicate that information reliably forward. There are also structural monitoring, and what we, in terms of although I didn't show any close-up here, we added arrays, dense distribution of stations here and also in Húsavík. And we are doing that to push the limit of what is the distance between stations on the same geological unit that is sufficient for us to say, well, even if we have more units, it's not going to give us more information. So this is a practical aspect. How dense does it need to be? Because the utopian to have 1 unit per square meter is of course not useful or practically feasible at all. Now and then during this project we got a seismic swarm that we recorded well and tested the procedure. Now the fourth testbed is Greece. It shows the current station locations of both the turnkey stations and the existing sensor networks. And this is operated by NOAA, and they are running a SeisComp server that retrieves the data and then pushes it forward to SeisComp in a central SeisComp system at Gempa that is there to basically aid the development of the platform. But all testbeds, they are receiving the data locally first. The purpose here was similar to Iceland. It's a very active area, and the densification of stations in a town, focusing on ground motions and important infrastructure such as schools, and also regional monitoring of the fault system in this region. And so, in the same as in Iceland, it was the earthquake early warning and rapid response to earthquakes, but there are not other geophysical markers that are being monitored there. If I go to it's quite a unique testbed. It's a port, and so with that we so this is a very strategic hub for, it's a man-made structure, and the focus here is on monitoring essentially the structural response of the wharves and the infrastructure there. So it's a rapid response to earthquake with focus there. Now, this is basically a container traffic hub, and so it's a quite important, at least essential, if not critical. Now, the focus here is also on the earthquake early warning, but for that is needed regional sensors as well. Let me see. And then finally, the testbed of Groningen, which is another quite unique testbed. It focuses on rapid response to earthquakes by monitoring the locks and viaducts and bridges. In this what's it called, natural gas field, where operation has produced a lot of seismicity, and there's an incredibly comprehensive network here, and the turnkey units, they were used to assess basically the infrastructure. But a lot of existing stations are included in this testbeds. Now, just to go quickly back in case I forgot. So, yeah, it's here. The INFP, Stefan Balan is leading this one. BRGM was number 2, it's Pierre Giel. And myself at University of Iceland and our team. It's Nikos Melis of NOAA who's leading this testbed. Barbara Borzi at the U Center. And then it's Elmer Rögrov and Mario Martinelli at KNMI and Deltares, respectively. Now, I'll give a quick example of the testbed in Iceland. It's the one I am most familiar with. And basically, I stated this before. We essentially never had a real-time consistent measurements of the earthquake wave field. The entire one, through strong motions from magnitude 6. The national network would saturate and have no data within 50 kilometers of an earthquake, which of course is not useful. Now also, we distributed the blue dots, we distributed the stations across along the spine of the fault system, which is not a linear fault like this, where an earthquake early warning system would make perfect sense and obvious sense. But here the system is north-south parallel faults. We no idea which one is going to be next. We know approximately where they are. And so it's very curious. Does an earthquake early warning system work and is feasible and useful there? So this is supposed to testing of that. These arrays here were deployed when the volcanic eruption or the seismic sequence started, just before the volcanic eruption that happened over here. And that was a kind of an addition to the project, where we were trying to use arrays to describe the seismicity in real time, in high detail. Now, these are the measurements here. But this is the key after the measurements themselves. This is what we need. We need a reliable mobile network, because we cannot always have LAN where we are. And it's the transfer speed and reliability, along with the latency, which is the key thing. And Siemens, our partner in this project, they're a participant in the project, they tested the efficiency of data streaming from the units. And there were several things that came to light. Is that new technologies like LTM, and IoT work well, while 3G is not, we could expect not that optimal. 4G is much better, but surprisingly IoT, which is a new technology, works well. And that is in particular after the deployment of the Common Acquisition Protocol system that compresses the data. At the same time, it allows us to have multiple data types being transmitted, like Bernd suggested. You can have a web camera along with the temperature measurements and GPS and seismic, all at the same time, and getting the compression. And the Earth in Iceland is very dynamic, and so are we believe. Because we are very responsive. And so shortly after the eruption started, Siemens had added new transmission sites. And in this project, new communication nodes were optimally placed in Iceland to ensure the redundancy of this mobile transmissions of the data. And this is one, and another one in the north, where they suggested to try a new technology of lower transmission frequency, 700 megahertz, that is good at penetrating through concrete, because we are thinking about our infrastructure. So we put our instruments in buildings, and the best place to put it in buildings is in the basement. In the basement, you have no signal. I'll get to that a little bit. But yes, instruments for sure, basis. Next step is the mobile network. Absolute key, a foundation. Now, okay, let's see if this works. No? No, it is on the, or you have it, no? So, you just connect it and so basically we had been, we got a test of basically what we need to, how we need to respond with in terms of instrumentation, mobile communications and data processing. We got a real live test while we, during the project. Yeah, so going to the right? Yeah. Okay, so essentially this is a playback of the TURNkey network in Iceland, locating micro earthquakes that were taking place in along a magmatic intrusion that started here and moved towards the south, close to this town, and then culminated in an eruption up here. So, and this was just the network locations, and even better locations are, location based on networks, but even better locations are obtained when we are using the arrays. Now, keep it there. Just keep it there. And is it this one? Yeah. Okay, so we'll have to, okay. And in the end, after the transmission that I showed was basically 2 weeks. Then the eruption started. After that, everything almost died. We had very little seismicity. This looks like a lot, but it's not. Very small earthquakes, and interestingly, this is a normal fault, and the seismicity is located in lobes. It shows how it's redistributing the stress. These are this is the seismicity recorded by the TURNkey network in Iceland, and then when the eruption started at the red line, just almost disappeared. It's like this pressure had been released. But it gave us an opportunity to test really how the network can perform when we need to provide, in a real life situation, these parameters to the turnkey platform. And the key is the rapid magnitude and hypercentral location determination, like Gemma was saying earlier. By getting those estimates and pushing to the network, to the platform, for the first estimates. Sorry, yeah, I can't hear you. Yeah, the first estimate, yes. Sorry. Then it will continue to get more data, and then it will revise those estimates and send them again. And so the platform gets repeated information from GEMPA, and therefore can update the estimates, like Pierre was talking about in terms of shake maps. So this process is the basis for the platform's operation, in addition to the felt reports that are coming from the testbed 8. Another one. Fine, we want to solve it now. So that will be this one. So network, real data coming in from these stations. The system is waiting. An earthquake comes in. Phases, red lines are identified. The P waves and the S waves are moving across the network. The ground motion levels are really not responding too much. This is just a magnitude 1.1. And this is the location, which is exactly where it's supposed to be. So yeah, that's how it is. But then another phase comes in. It's much larger. See how it dwarfs this one. The phases coming in, the network responding, the ground motion levels are becoming much larger. The magnitude is updating here, and the location as well. So this is a real-time playback of just how quickly we get the locations of the earthquake and the magnitude. Close this one. Okay. Okay. So here is, let's say, an overview. What you saw earlier was the real data. But that's not what the platform gets. The platform gets parametric estimates based on the real data, parameters that are of interest to the engineering community. First off, it is the magnitude. It's the earthquake magnitude. These are two cases of the convergence of the magnitude estimate with time from the earthquake. This is for a magnitude 5.3 something event. This is for a magnitude 2.6. So the blue line is how many stations are receiving the data over time. And as a consequence, you see the initial magnitudes are being estimated. And already, just 3-4 seconds after the earthquake, we have a magnitude estimation, first estimate, that is well within the uncertainty that we associate with magnitudes. So already, almost immediately, we get very useful values. And even though this seems to show a lot of change, it's not. So it's quite robust. These are examples of the data that are coming from multimetric instruments. Ground motion data, well, you can't really see anything. So ground motion, This is structural response, GPS data, and also radon time histories from Bucharest, where we are, well, if we have this multi-sensor instrument, why not combine other geophysical markers, have the system on record, everything is transmitted consistently, and then we'll see. Do we see some correlations that we didn't expect? Bernd mentioned earlier that their quaking service has been expanded to allow Did You Feel It reports. It's a web service that has the following features that are listed here. And basically this enables the platform to obtain this data in the format that he showed earlier with the felt reports, where it's a quite intuitive way of having an overview of what the felt reports from a much larger network than our ground motion networks have can actually provide us with. And this one was in Bosnia 4 days ago. But this one is Bernd made this one, and it's quite telling. If the earthquake happens here and then time passes, there are various layers that need to be covered before the platform gets the data. So first, like Gemma was saying, first the instruments are receiving the data. They can be ground motion or structural response or whatever. Then you have the data from the earthquake network, which is a partner, last quake EMC, which is a partner, and then from this, I can't really see it. What was it? I think it was USGS, wasn't it? Yeah, and Gempa here. So a couple of channels. The data is fed into the Common Acquisition Protocol system that combines all the data into one format. The GPS data is forwarded to Yetitmu's GNSS analysis system. The displacements are fed back into the CAPS system, and then that data is fed into both the SIZEComp data management and processing system, and also the Presto early warning module that has been implemented. And together they feed the data, and it may, perhaps it isn't shown here. This is earthquake and strong motion parameters, so both magnitude and location, and also peak values at the instruments themselves. While here we have the seismic and displacement time series in MSEED format. The felt reports go a different way. They are fed into the felt report collection module that is then fed directly into QuakeLink. That information here is then fed into the TURNkey engine. And that's really what Alberto and Abdelghani are going to talk about. This is really how we get from the nuts and bolts and into this advanced system. Now, a couple of things I wanted to mention. 5 minutes. No, I have 10. It's incredibly difficult to maintain a reliable, consistent, high-quality data streaming for various purposes. The technical personnel that we need to have available, they need to be people that are carpenters, plumbers, electricians, computer scientists, telecommunication experts, improvisers, because stuff really goes wrong when we're trying to install instruments, and then it's a bonus if they are seismologists or earthquake engineers. But really, when we want to deploy instruments, even if they are as robust as these instruments are, have a small form factor, they have the latest technologies, and they're supposed to be plug and play, and they really are. But when you're out in the field, and everybody that has done some field work knows this, everything that can go wrong will go wrong at some point. And it's not a matter of how good of a scientist you are or a technical person, it's how you improvise to get yourself out of that jam that you're in. And this in Iceland can be difficult when your hair is freezing on you because you're up on the glacier with some instruments. That's why I think maybe that's why I like to be on the earthquake engineering side, because I can always be in people's basements. It's warm and cozy. But no, we had field deployments, and the just protecting it from the weather was a challenge. But once we have selected the site, which is another thing, we found that when we deployed, and this is basically I'm filtering together the experience from the testbeds. We found them to be quite robust and really simple and easy to work with. In the testing of the mobile testbed, where we're supposed to have instruments that we take to an earthquake area, just taking the unit, putting it on the ground without anchoring was giving quite good results of the ground motions. And then the only issue was that how can we ensure that timestamp to be reliable? The GPS. Do we have GPS, or do we have to hook it up to a network timing protocol server? And if so, we need to have the communication mobile layer very robust. So same with the GPS units that were developed in this project. They have very specific instructions how you go about the deployment, and that works really well. And each unit is pre-configured then. We need to do that in the testbeds with the Raspberry Shake. This one needs an updated operating system for this to work. So that's another thing. It's about the computer scientist thing that I mentioned. So, and then everything works fine. But then, of course, we get the expected issues, which is the operational stability. And then sometimes we didn't have operational stability, and then we had to find out what it was. And in one case, it was because the power cable from the power and communication cable from the unit to the power supply was too long. So the voltage dropped 0.1 volt, and that caused issues in the data that we had never seen before. It's expected, but unexpected. So then we need to protect it from environmental factors, and that varies tremendously between the testbeds. Then we need to optimize the transmission reliability. And thankfully, we are not reliant on directivity antennas. We find that with the data compression and new technologies that it works surprisingly well. So we're happy with that, and that was checked specifically. Then, of course, Gempa had a dedicated support portal during the project where we in the testbeds could log our concerns, or let's say we're seeing some troubles and we need help with troubleshooting. That was a very important element in helping us in the testbeds make things go smoothly. And I forget, Bernd, but you may remember how many tickets were issued in the system. How many? 200, 300? Yeah. So after all this, and this is a learning curve, we found a very good operational stability, regular maintenance for sure. Every once in a while I need to call a janitor and ask him to walk down into the basement and just turn it off and turn it on again. That's the first thing we try, not to overcomplicate it. Okay, this is too small. But the best practices we found is that when we have the turnkey multi-sensor unit and the GPS units, When we have them deployed and equipped with the sufficient casing, supplies, and protection, they are very useful in densifying existing networks and for multi-sensor station deployment, where we are measuring velocity of the ground motion, acceleration of the ground motion, and displacement of the ground motion, which is basically we're measuring the entire wave field. But these are two. We can split this into two parts. Are we inside or are we outside? First of all, if we're inside, we find the suitable structure, and that's usually an infrastructure that we are interested in. It's a hospital, it's a hydroelectric power plant, it's a dam or something, or a bridge or railway. We need to get permissions. Now, varies greatly between the testbeds, but it's a huge issue. Takes an unbelievable time. Cannot be underestimated. Then, after getting a permission, we need to have access on-site and remotely. How can we ensure that? In some cases, the infrastructure, you need special permissions and a hard hat to enter the area. These two are the most time-consuming part, making sure that we obtain the permissions and then have the access. There is also, I'll go into it, And then when we have that covered, we need to find the suitable location and install it with a minimal footprint so it's not accidentally bumped into by heavy equipment or something like that. So this is one instance. You find a corner that is a dead corner, nobody uses it. You bolt this to the floor, you have the control box here, you cover it and you lock it, and here's the antenna cable that goes up as high up in the basement as possible. It's a special antenna that has much higher sensitivity so that we can actually reach through the wall and get some signal. And that's why I say seismologists that are out in the field focusing on small earthquakes, they have the easiest time, not easiest, but they at least have different, they have the elements and power to deal with, but we have this to deal with. We cannot just bring in a computer and plug it into the network cable in the wall. And outside deployment, it's a standalone, and that how do we supply power? I was telling people in the break that in one instance up north, there's a station that dies every night during the winter. It's quite an important site, but even with the 2 or 3 40 ampere hour batteries that are there, you have 4 types of instruments and the router. They take power. The nice days up there are the worst, because during the winter there's so little sunlight that the solar panels cannot produce enough power. And during calm days, that almost never happens, then the wind propeller doesn't generate any power, so this station is dead. And then you see it again when when it pops up again on the screen in the station view, Gempa station view module, where you see the health of the instruments. Then we know either the weather is bad or the sun is shining. So it is. And during this time, it barely can operate to keep the instruments operational. It cannot charge also the batteries. So there are all kinds of things when you're outside. But protection from the elements and the vandalism, which is not really maybe depends. Animals varies widely. But then when you're doing structural monitoring on top of buildings, you need to be on the roof. And then you need to have a suitable protection. You need to get a permission to drill into the roof or the wall, which is not always the case, easy to get. Different site installations. Then, this is a big issue, like I said, we found that telecommunications is really important. And routers that are capable of switching between different communication modes, 3G, 4G, are are the most flexible, and that's what we recommend in our collaboration with Siemens Telecommunications. Of course, you need backup power there. If you have LAN available, use it. Then you have a third party to deal with. And if it's an institute, then you need a VPN, you need a secure line. Are you then going to have permission to go through a port? Or is it going to be passively data forwarded out? That's always takes a lot of time. We highly recommend closed virtual private networks for data security. And in those cases, you basically don't have, if it's an institutional VPN, then you don't have access. So you need to open up the seedling port to transmit the data. Otherwise, how are you going to do it? And then you need to have some special permission. Ask the IT department of the institute to add your institute's IP address on the permitted IP address list so that you can log in. And depending on the flexibility of that institute or that institution, that may not be straightforward. Once we clear this thing, I think, okay, sorry, here, one point more. Yeah, okay. Well, I mentioned this, but so once we cover this, like I said before, when we have the instruments, we have optimized the telecommunications, then SizeComp takes over, and everything works well, like Bernd said, and data is being fed into the platform. So with that, I'll said all of this before. Just thank you for your attention. I hope you managed to follow at least the big picture. Thank you.